So I would distribute the negative 16 and get negative 16t squared. Negative 16 times negative 8 is, believe it or not, 128t. Negative 16 times positive 16 is negative 256. But now I've got to add 406, add on the end. Don't need the parentheses anymore since I've already distributed. And that gives me negative 16t squared plus 128t plus 150, which is exactly the same as what I started with. So that proves that the vertex form is identical. It's just the difference between a potato and a French fry. They're both still the same thing, but they're in different forms. Okay, so the other question that we wanted to answer was, when is the missile expected to hit the ground? Well, that's going to be the point at which the we don't know what time it is, but we know that the height will be 0. In other words, when that sucker hits the ground, it will have a height of 0 feet. So we wanted to discover when that occurs. Well, we described earlier that putting in 0 and solving for t does not work because we can't combine like terms here. We have two t's floating around. One's t squared, one is t. But the advantage of the vertex form, h equals negative 16, t minus 4 squared, plus 406, is that I only have one t in this equation. So if I could figure out how to isolate the t, then I'd be in good shape. In other words, I want to know when h is 0, and I want to solve for t. All right, well, the first thing I can do is I want to think in terms of opposite. I know that if I put in a value for t, I would first do what's in the parentheses, check. Then I do the exponent, check. Then I would multiply, check. Then I would add, check. And that's all the operations that would give me the corresponding height if I knew what the time was. But now I'm working backwards. So if I know the height, well, I've got to, the last thing I did was add. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract. So subtract 406 from both sides. That gives me negative 406 equals negative 16 t minus 4 squared. So whenever you're undoing something, you're working backwards. So the next thing would be, well, the second to last thing I did was multiply. So instead of multiplying by negative 16, I want to get rid of the factor, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 16. That gives me 25.375 on the left-hand side. And that leaves me with, well, those divide out, t minus 4 squared. Well, you know, it might be tempting to try to FOIL it, but we don't want to do that because then we'll end up with a t squared and a t again. But what do? We did an exponent, right? We took the square. So the opposite of doing a square is a square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And importantly, the value that multiplied by itself that gives me 25.375 is a positive or a negative value, because a negative times a negative is a positive times a positive is a positive. So I'm going to test this. Square root of 25.375, and that gives me 5.04 will do. Plus or minus 5.04 equals, well, the square and the square root are opposite actions, so I've got t minus 4 left. Well, this might be questionable. Okay, so what do I do now? Because when I add the 4 to both sides, so that's the last step, because what I did in the parentheses was subtract. So to get rid of that 4, now I'm just going to add it away. Okay, so I'll add it to both sides. But now the 5.04 could be positive or it could be negative. So which one do I use in order to find t? Well, as a matter of fact, if I just write 4 plus or minus 5.04 equals t, that shows me that I could have 4 plus 5.04 or 4 minus 5.04. So this leads to two possibilities: 4 plus 5.04 and 4 minus 5.04. So that gives me, well, if I add, then I get 9.04, and if I subtract, then I get negative 1.04. So t could be one of two possibilities: negative 1.04 or 9.04. Well, that might seem confusing for a moment, because how can the object hit the ground at 2 points?